Let's get started then. Fabulous. Hello everyone, and welcome to the morning session at simplyic. So right now we have got Anisu Verghese, and he will be talking about digital inclusion. So Anisu has been writing about communications for over a decade with his blog and newsletter while working as an in-house practitioner for globally recognized brands. So he was based in India, and he has led comms for brands such as Tesco, Accenture, and Sabre. He's also the author of 3 books, which Anisu will be mentioning a little bit later as well. And he is really, really passionate about inclusion. So yeah, I will leave that to you, Anisu.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So let me begin by making a statement. I think internal comms is flawed. I think we don't seem to trust employees enough. We don't seem to take their views enough, and we don't seem to partner enough with them. And that's really the basis of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm also going to share some examples. I have a model, and I'll walk you through some recommendations. So that's really the basis of my address. So let me first begin by asking you this particular question. So are employees an audience? Are they a stakeholder? Are they, a partner? Which of these do you think they are? All the above, but which one do you think is probably the most appropriate? Partners? Okay, fantastic. So, but how much of how often do we really think of them as partners, or how much do we really involve them when we think of communications, internal communications? Do we do enough? No? Okay. Okay, so let me kind of show you a video first, and then let's get into a bit of a conversation. Oh, it doesn't seem to come up. Mm-hmm. Let me do it the old-fashioned way of playing it off here. Okay, I don't think that is the audio not playing.
Audio not playing.
That's on. There is? Okay. Okay, and let me just toggle back to the presentation. Okay, so question to you. So who created this video? Was it created by the organization? Was it created by an agency? Was it created by employees? Was it created by someone else? Who created this? Employees, okay. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that it's pretty amateurish. It's not got that corporate feel. It's, so let me give you the backstory. So this is, of course, from what you saw, dress code policy and employees kind of doing it. But this a company where I worked in, Sapient, and it's an IT technology firm, and it's based out of the US. It's got offices in India, about 15 to 20,000 employees when I worked back then. And one of the biggest challenges was that they were facing was that there were clients visiting the offices, and they always had a challenge. The partners were very, very astonished that staff didn't turn up in the way they expected them to be. They were dressing down, they were walking in with slippers and all kinds of wear, and they were a bit scared that they would lose clients because that's not the right dress code to wear. So obviously the first thing they did was go to HR and say, hey, this is not appropriate, let's enforce a dress code policy. And so HR said, okay, let's do it. And they started sending mails saying, do it or else, things will go wrong if you don't dress up appropriately, and this is our values and all of that. What do you think happened? People left? No, I mean, thankfully they stayed, but they didn't change their behavior. Exactly, yeah, so they weren't very open to changing, and the mails continued from HR. At some point, HR realized and they threw up their hands and said, what should we do? And they reached out to the comms team, and we said, have you asked employees as to what they would like to do and how they would like to be communicated with? They said, how should we do it? I said, why don't we get a group of people in? Let's do a focus group. Let's ask them. Let's take their views, and maybe see how things go. And we gathered a group of people, and they came up with this idea saying, why don't we create a video so that we can help our colleagues understand better about how they should dress, and let's use that. So obviously there was a bit of skepticism saying, how can they create something and will it work? But I kind of pushed it through and said, let's give them a chance, and if it fails, it fails. We'll try something else. And this video was created by employees. It is not really a video because it is a patchwork of photographs that they shot, and they kind of pieced it together. But this video, which was sent out to employees, became the most watched video, and it started changing the behavior in the company, and people started dressing most appropriately, and leaders were appreciative of what was happening. So this was obviously eye-opening for the HR team. It was eye-opening for leadership, that yes, if you can go to staff and involve them in the process, there's a greater chance that things would change, people would change behavior, and you would get the right kind of messaging through. So that is how it worked. So let me kind of do a quick poll and a quiz. And again, I'm not using the app. I wanted to make it a bit interactive. So what percentage of millennials trust user-generated content more than any other information, say, company website, news articles, when looking for information about a brand, product, or service? So what do you think this number is? 70%, yeah, pretty high, absolutely. So it's 51, unfortunately, so it's not as high as you thought, but it's definitely high as a number. What percentage of the world's high-performing enterprises will be using outsourcing by 2018? So it's a dated study, but nevertheless, the number is quite interesting. What do you think this number is? 80%. 75%, quite close, so good. So it clearly shows that there is a greater chance that we are moving towards crowdsourcing, outsourcing in some sense. What percentage of communicators believe that co-creation of brand content alongside users will be the most outstanding trend in the future? So co-creation of content, and it's already happening in organizations. So what percentage do you think this is? So 52% again. So again, it's significantly high, definitely. And this is interesting. So what percentage of executives rated employee experience is very important, but what percentage reported that their companies were excellent at building that experience? So obviously these numbers quite diverse. 90, and what would be the other number? 10, yeah, so, okay, so it's about 80 and 22. So there is a significant gap. And the last one, what percentage of employees feel that they can make a difference in society? Everyone wants to give back. And with believing that they can make a great impact, than business leaders can. they believe they can do more than what business leaders can. So what number do you think this is? 50 and yeah? So again, there is interesting percentage. So it's 71 and 62. So all of these employees inside the organization believe that they want to make a difference, they want to make an impact, and they really need to be empowered. But I'm going to tell you about why that's not really happening. So let me set some context. This is interesting note on the page society, which says that the role of an employee, be it active or retired, is to be involved in public relations, which of course is a broader form of communications. And the role of the corporate communications team is to advocate for the respect, diversity, and inclusion of the staff and make sure that they are honest, knowledgeable ambassadors. Now, this is fascinating because how many of us really think in this way? How many of us act in this way when we are communicators? So our role is quite defined. The employee's role is also quite defined, but I don't think we really do much about it. And of course, there is the Edelman Trust Barometer, which says trust is eroding. But what's interesting is that employees trust other employees more than their managers. And I kind of call out two points where the gap is quite significant. Employees have a voice, and employees are included in planning. Now, if we don't involve employees in the planning process, they don't feel that they are part of the organization. The sense of belonging is missing. And if they don't have a voice, that's also damaging. There is also data which says that, hey, that if you have just 3% of your employees who are sharing content, the impact is almost 30%. So vis-a-vis what corporates share. So again, there is trends which suggest that employees have almost 8 times the reach of the corporate accounts on social media. So again, important for us to know that this is a trend and this is happening, and we aren't probably tapping that enough. And then when it comes to brand ownership, in the past, we used to think that brands were owned by the brand team and employees really didn't have a say in it. But in today's world, it's not so. Employees are equal partners, and we need to be thinking of it in that sense. They can really make a difference, and we need to involve them. And as work gets more collaborative, and we've been listening to presentations about different platforms helping, there are opportunities to empower staff to be more included and participate in the entire process. And again, I was talking about the gap. There is a significant gap between how employers say and what they really do. And that's, again, an issue in companies. So the say-do gap continues to increase. This McKinsey study, and interestingly, what comes out is that what employers think staff want and what staff really want, there's a huge, significant gap. And that gap is because staff want managers. They want managers to be appreciative of them, leaders to be appreciative. They want to have a sense of belonging. But employers think they just need pay, they need benefits, they need, and the entire focus of well-being during, of course, COVID kind of spiked. And this is a significant gap. And therefore, there is that discontentment inside organizations. And unless internal communicators think about it, they will not be able to bridge this gap. So what do employees want? They want empowerment. They want to be heard. They want to be given the autonomy. And as you know, there is also employee activism on the rise. You have organizations with employees walking out and striking against their own organizations, and that's happening a lot more in today's world. And as you know, trust is eroding, not just inside organizations. You have trust eroding in media, trust eroding in various other government bodies and all of it. And all this put together, of course, has a significant impact on how we think about communications. On the other hand, organizations don't trust employees. And of course, there is this bit of thefts happening inside the organization, data privacy issues, and therefore organizations don't trust employees enough. And they like to control. They like to make sure that employees don't have a say in how things are. And you've been also hearing stories of surveillance, Big Brother kind of watching over employees. If you move your head and the camera spots that you're not at your desk, and then you are fined, or you kind of made to work extra. So obviously that's not helpful. That's not helping build trust among employees. and that's actually damaging the internal culture. On the other hand, communicators are also the least engaged. So this study by Gartner clearly indicates that communicators themselves aren't giving discretionary effort as much as they should, and they are one of the least engaged. So again, a wake-up call for communicators around the world to think about this differently. There's an interesting study by Francisco Gino about how employees are forced to conform, and everyone tries. Organizations want them to be like others so that they can get work done better. But unfortunately, that's not helpful, because when people are not bringing their best selves to the workplace, they aren't being who they are, and in turn, that erodes trust, it erodes credibility, and all of it. And then there's, of course, again, a data study, but nevertheless interesting to see that how are organizations involving employees? Are they really involving them in big ticket decisions? Are they involving them in problem solving? Not really. So if you see, of course, you have those staff meetings happening, but when it comes to problem solving for the organization, organizations are not involving staff enough. And that's, again, goes back to what I was saying. We don't do enough of this. And how can we expect organizations to change the ways of working and employees to feel that they are included? And even when it comes to internal communicators, when they do work, how often do we go to employees and pre-test our communication? How often do we involve them and ask for their opinion? Will this messaging work for you? Does this really help? Or involve them early in the process so that we don't catch mistakes downstream. So again, clearly called out, there hasn't been much done in this space, and there's obviously an opportunity for us. So I think there is a lot for us to do to make it more inclusive. So the book which I most recently wrote is Inclusive Internal Communications, and the entire crux of the book is about how can we get employees to be partners of change. So what are the opportunities ahead of us? Of course, managers need to, we need managers who think differently and who can also, of course, involve their employees in even more. And that empowerment is so crucial for employees, and they're seeking that, and they're not getting enough of it. And on the other hand, we keep hearing of engagement. What does really engagement mean in the past, and what does it mean now? In the past, of course, it was about the paycheck, it was about satisfaction, what my boss says, what's my annual review. But now it's more about ongoing conversations, my strengths, my life, things beyond work. Am I being empowered to do what I can to be more effective, to bring my best self to the workplace? They seek reward and social worth, and again, that's not happening enough at the workplace. And when I was talking about outsourcing and crowdsourcing, I was talking about this. There's a future where organizations need to be involving employees by crowdsourcing ideas, generating a lot of internal content, which can, in the long run, help the organization, because it's all about staff. It's all about how to get them to be participatory in the entire process. So employees also want work done their way. They want to be sure that when they're working, they have the freedom, the flexibility, the autonomy, and again, not much of it is happening. And being themselves at the workplace is something which is a struggle, and I know a lot of organizations are investing to make sure that employees can be more involved and more engaged. And of course, there's more from the psychological safety perspective, that they can come to the workplace and be who they are, say what they want, and still not be victimized. There's been research which says that when employees are given choice, they are much more engaged than those who aren't being given that much choice, and that leads to better innovation, better performance, satisfaction, all of it. So there is significant research being done in the space to show that yes, this works. And as I said, there is this continuum. Of course, at the big, one side of the continuum is, okay, employees will, organizations would have newsletters and those kind of bulletin boards and all those things which are one-way communication. But on the other hand, if you really want to engage employees, you need to start involving them in autonomous groups, giving them the freedom, And yes, there are organizations who are already doing this kind of work, so I'll show you some examples of it. On the other hand, there is also about employee voice. Like I mentioned, employee voice is something which can significantly change the approach and attitude of how employees think. And when employees are allowed to give their suggestions and ideas, they have reported almost an 83% positive employee experience. Likewise, when they have a freedom to decide how they do their work, that's a 79% increase in how they consider the workplace and the experience that they get out of it. Co-creating content and co-creating stories, and this is really the future. Some organizations, I know GE and other companies have already begun this journey, and they're doing a great job of it. And I think this is important. So it's about storytelling together. It's not the comms team holding the content, believing that they know everything about how to tell stories, but really trusting employees to come out and share stories in authentic ways. So based on all these trends, so let me pose a question to you. So what are your thoughts about what you've seen? So the trends that you've seen, the ways in which organizations are behaving. So what are your perspectives? What do you think should be done or can be done better? Any views? Or any reactions on some of the trends that you spotted? Partner with employees at the onset. Fantastic. Okay, great. Any other thoughts? Any other reactions?
I agree exactly with what you say, and I think a lot of it comes down to leadership. So if leadership role model and set the tone and the culture of the organisation, that becomes an accepted norm, and other leaders and managers follow suit, and it becomes a much more interactive discussion across the organisation.
Fantastic.
If the leader is very top-down, very command and control, you get an entirely different culture, which plays into a lot of the statistics that you just presented.
Absolutely. Great point there. Yes, a couple of hands there in the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just add to that. I think there is a particular dynamic that's happening right now, which is really challenging for internal comms. So picking up on what Lorraine said about leadership, we've got a cohort of leaders who are of a certain generation, who are used to communicating in a certain way, hierarchically, talking to a workforce that is far less engaged by hierarchical communication and much more about peer-to-peer engagement.
True.
And I think that clash presents a real problem for internal communicators right now.
Fantastic. That's a great point. So that clash or the friction that you're talking about, that's absolutely spot on. Great point. Thank you. Yeah.
We know that our employee stories on our intranet are the most engaged content we do, which is obvious to everyone, but we've got them sharing stories on different things, not just work stuff, and little videos. But one of the things that we did have to do was encourage the senior leaders to go on and comment and engage on those pieces as well. And then that meant the most to the employees that shared their stories. And so that was the kind of, it wasn't so much getting employees to share their stories, it was more getting the engagement from the leaders, because the leaders went, oh, it's really nice they've done it. We said, well, you need to tell them that it's nice that they've done it.
Absolutely, yes. So the leadership involvement is absolutely crucial. Great point. Okay, let me kind of talk to you about a few approaches, and I'll share with you a couple of examples of the work which I have done and maybe of help to you. So again, when you think of involving employees, so again, from an internal comm standpoint, there are opportunities where you can involve them in everyday decision making, in big ticket decision making, and there's also about how do you influence your leaders to be a bit more open about involving them in problem solving for the organization. And believe me, there are employees are smart enough to figure things out, and if you give them the platform and the opportunity, they can do wonders. There is this shift, of course, towards participatory engagement. So in the past, it was more about standardizing, how things work, and today it's more about the personalization, the individual aspects which you need to look at. And like you mentioned, some leaders are authoritative, hierarchical, but then it's more participatory in today's world. So again, having that understanding and helping and coaching leaders to also think in this way can change how they approach communications. There is also this thinking, and there's also studies done around organizational networks and whether it works and who are the biggest influencers in your organization. And there is this group of informal leaders that you have. They may not be, having great roles or designations, but if you know who they are and how they kind of operate, you can tap into them, and that resource group for you as a communicator can be really, really useful in terms of getting the message across, making sure that the messaging is right, all of it. And I was talking about the progression. So in the past, of course, there is organizations who don't involve the organizations, very hierarchical, and then there is the joint consultation which happens, and of course towards the end of the spectrum is the worker control, where there's autonomy, there's freedom, and there are organizations, I don't know if you heard of Morningstar, which is a tomato manufacturing unit in the US, and they have a method where people come in, discuss what their job responsibilities are, and they share it with each other, and they agree on what they're going to deliver, and based on that they go about their work. And now that's a fantastic model to have. Will it work in all organizations? Maybe not, but then it is possible, and that is a clear example that that kind of a mindset definitely works. Let me give you an example from one of my most recent employers, Sabre. So Sabre is a travel technology firm. Again, about 15,000 employees in India, about 6,000 plus. And what was interesting was that as a comms leader, I believe that employees have great ideas, great strengths. And one of the things which I passionately do is make sure that I get a slot in the orientation program and go and talk to them and figure out also, almost like talent spotting, employees out there who have great talent in, say, content, design, art, music, drama, anything that they can bring to the table over and above their work, the regular work that they do. And what I do is then create something like an informal brand council where people can walk in, walk out, but they can bring in their ideas, bring in their suggestions, bring in their skills to the table, and in terms of how they can contribute to comms. So in one of those discussions, a thought came out was that why don't we have a podcast? Because it's a simpler and easier way to kind of get the message across. People appreciate audio and all of that. And so this idea came from a youngster in this brand council, and all of them were quite supportive. And this entire concept of having a podcast came from employees. And then they said, why don't we even have a contest where we reach out and find out who's a good radio jockey and who can host this program? And we did a contest. And so the role of the communications team became more of a facilitator, more of a curator, rather than telling them what to do. All we gave them was the resources, gave them the platform, gave them all the opportunities that they needed. And this was launched as a fortnightly podcast, and it continues to run in the organization and is the most widely heard, listened, viewed podcast for the company. In fact, people have written back saying, hey, we don't read the emails, but we listen to this podcast. And we'd also measured it by doing a poll, and we got an NPS score of 83, which clearly shows is really well received. So again, a great example of giving employees the platform, giving them the opportunity, and this entire content is created, curated, and published by staff. So it has information about the business. It has some informal stuff like music, people who can, they do some interviews, all kinds of great content which people really look forward to. So that's one example. Then I've worked in Tesco, both in India and briefly in the UK. And when I was in the UK, I had this opportunity to work closely with the team in the headquarters at Welland Garden City. And what struck me was Tesco in those days was about 450,000 employees. And I was really amazed that they didn't have a way to capture stories across the organization. Imagine 450,000 employees, and you don't have a concrete way to gather stories. So what I did was I put a paper and I shared it with the director of comms, and it went up to the CEO, and they said, okay, why don't, the premise was, why don't we have some kind of a platform where we generate content directly for employees rather than the traditional way of capturing stories, which means that the comms team goes out, figures out who should be interviewed, does the interview, puts it together, publishes it, and then tries to measure it. I said, why don't you turn the tables where we have a form, a simple form on the intranet. We go out there, share it with employees, and ask them to submit their stories in a very simple way so that they can all relate. And we're talking about people in the office, people in stores, people in distribution centers who are directly in touch with customers. And of course, Tesco's tagline was, little helps every day, and we wanted to kind of tap into that. And so the CEO was happy to put the message out, and within a short span of just about 2 to 3 weeks, we were able to gather about 500 to 600 stories. I don't think Tesco, if they had kind of went out there to kind of gather these stories, it would have taken them a lot more time to kind of put these stories together. So this continues to be a platform on the intranet where people submit their stories. It's a simple form, and it's about how they're helping customers, how they're helping the stakeholders in the stores, all of that. So again, a simpler way of just storytelling, gathering information, getting employees to be involved. This is an example from Accenture, and this I'm talking of 2006, 2005, 2006, when I worked in India. And employees were the newscasters in the organization. They were the ones who went out and did the vox pop, gathered stories, and then we created a green room, and we kind of had a presenter sit there and share their stories. And again, one of the most widely watched videos and capsules, much more than what you get from leadership teams' emails. All right, and then the last one which I wanted to share was again from Tesco in India. So again, like I mentioned, this brand council and the fact that people had different skills of music, drama, doing emceeing at events, and we said, why don't we give them the opportunity to participate in these events rather than have an external host or someone who's not from within the organization. So we invited employees to contribute to in terms of content, be it music, be it emceeing an event, taking photographs of the event. And some of the photographs that employees were taking were far, far more effective and much more creative than what we got from third-party agencies who are tied up with the organization. So in a sense, we were able to increase the engagement, get them to participate. They felt involved, they felt excited, and we could see that there were a continuous series of people who were raising their hands and saying, yes, I can do this and I can contribute as well. So in sum, I wanted to share this kind of a chart which kind of captures what I believe is the right approach to ensuring there is an inclusive way to internal comms, which is, on one hand, of course, you need to begin by involving them. And like I said, because trust has eroded, it takes a lot more time to get them to appreciate that you are really meaning what you're meaning. So invite their views, tap into the enthusiasm. You could, talent spot, and that's very crucial. Engage with them. So it could be about shared ownership, encouraging, employee voice, engaging the champions. So you have brand ambassadors, advocates. There are people who have fantastic passion about the brand, and they can do that. And of course, these are in-house technical experts, so you can tap into. And the other extreme, I would say, the empowerment, where you kind of think about crowdsourcing content, sharing success stories. So again, storytelling comes in handy. And importantly, there's a piece which I think is crucial. It's called entrepreneurship. It's more of how do you retain the creative ideas within rather than have employees leave the organization and start their own units. So again, investing in their personal brand is so crucial. So what I also do is help employees to understand how they can build their personal brands. And I know PwC does a great job of this. Usually they can, when they hire people from campus, they spend a lot of time investing in building the students' personal brands. And we always think this might be counterintuitive. If you build their personal brands, they will leave. Unfortunately, it's not so. In fact, we have found that people who have, in organizations invest in them, they continue to stay on, and they feel much more engaged and empowered. So that's really what I wanted to share. So in sum, basically, trust your employees as equal partners. You need to demonstrate that you mean what you do, and as a comms leader, you can step up and show and demonstrate positive action. And most importantly, of course, encourage those citizenship behaviors which go over and above at the workplace. Thank you so much. And this is the latest book that I've not officially announced it. I'm waiting for the ebooks to be listed before I kind of make it official, but I thought I should share this with you. This is my second book on internal comms. The first one was in 2010 when I talked about the topic. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, happy to take them.
question from the app, which is, do you have any suggestions on how to engage a workforce that is not desk-based? So no computer access when you're trying to get them to be involved in generating content and stories.
Yeah, so I think going back to the Tesco example, I think that's very clear. There are staff there who were not desk-based. They were in the distribution centers. They were sales teams out there. So again, obviously they needed to have access to the internet in some shape. So that would be a preferred way of doing it. So yes, so involving staff by I think the important thing is to make it simple, make it easy for them to access, and also give them the trust that yes, you really are going to use the content, because sometimes organizations do surveys, they do all these kind of initiatives, and all this content sits somewhere and no one really cares about it, and next time you go around they are apprehensive about contributing. So going back to the question, I think it would help to take this approach. Any other question? Go ahead.
Sorry,
Sure.
run this over.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting. How would you, we obviously all know the value of employee-generated content, but sometimes when proposing it, senior leaders raise the concern of like opening a can of worms, which is a saying I've heard in the past, like often. How would you counter that if a senior leader is reluctant for you to reach out for employee-generated content for fear of opening the kind of proverbial can of worms?
Well, then it's a culture issue, and I think you need to address that first. So you can't really expect employees to start sharing content if they don't really believe that the culture is transparent and open enough. So you need to break that issue, and I think then that's a different intervention where you'll have to sit with your leadership team to understand why they have the resistance, what are their fears, maybe what are the risks they think, and you could even show them that. And I think it's important to demonstrate examples of, okay, we can do this and we can test it out and see if it works, and then keep incrementally progressing. So that's one way of getting leaders to be on your side.
So baby steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Anything on the app?
We've got a few more on the app.
Okay.
So what difference do you see regarding internal comms for Indian employees versus like British ones? Is one of them.
Okay. Well, when you say difference, is that what the question is? What difference? Okay. Well, that's, I think from a cultural standpoint, because I worked in India, I worked very briefly in the UK, so I don't really have too much context about the UK market. But yes, I think it's about how you present yourself and what, the kind of content that you put out. Sometimes, again, culturally, I would say in India, people don't want to tom-tom about their work. They are quite low-key. They prefer to let their work do the talking. It may not be the same in other markets. I know in the US it's not. There's a lot more, let's sell, let's kind of get our word out there. So I think that's the way I've seen it. And therefore, when you're, even from a cultural standpoint, when you're writing the content or you're doing internal comms, you need to be aware of these nuances when you're communicating. And it's also helpful to have these face-to-face conversations whenever you get the opportunity, where leaders can come in and talk through some of the cultural differences and how it matters, and therefore what they really meant when they wrote that email is helpful to clarify that in those different markets that they're going. So I think that's the way I would kind of approach it.
Great, and then we've got time for one more question, which is, how do you keep the interest and momentum with the employee-led initiatives going? For example, the podcast, and have you had like good success with it, or is it a little bit of a challenge?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think the key word is consistency, and also the fact that yes, employees are doing this over and above their work, and therefore they may move on to some other project. They may not have the time. Yes, you'll need to think of the pipeline, and you need to think of, okay, and keep scanning, who's out there who can keep continue with the baton and pass on the baton to the next person. So therefore, it's also, that's the task with, like I said, the talent spotting bit, which comes is very crucial. And you'll also have to handhold them, because sometimes they may not understand the full context. the last person who did it and what is, so documenting it, making sure that there is ways of working, or at least the templates out there, so it's easier for the next person to come and pick it up and run with it.
Great, and that's everything we've got time for.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.